And that was also a beautiful part of just kind of really learning that the inner world is real and will reveal itself if you slow down to witness it. I think we don't fully appreciate that most of us have literally been trained that it's dangerous to be aware of yourself. We really do have a team of players inside.
Yeah. All right, so if you could you give us just a touch of your bio? I know it because I watch your YouTube videos, but if you could share with our audience just a touch of your bio, and then we'll jump right in.
Yeah, and this may be automatically moving into our conversation because it sounds like we're going to be talking about, who we are and how we develop, and sort of maybe even starting with some of my own journey. My bio on paper is, I'm a psychologist in private practice in Austin, Texas. I was also raised by two psychologists that did depth work. And they were so, great in terms of they loved their work. They were passionate about it. They were passionate about learning, and they were sort of like doing some of their own teaching and being leaders in the community. And then they would bring in just these amazing minds. Actually, that is an interesting thing. I would love to do some kind of YouTube video about this at some point, but just the power of elders, I was really lucky in that way. Not that my parents were perfect or any of these elders actually were perfect either, but to have older people, whether they're older or just wiser, but people around who can talk about, I guess as a therapist, I would call it the mind, or about life, but really just about human experience, some insights, as a point of connection, but also to build maps of understanding, because there's a lot to understand about being human. And we don't talk about it in school or sometimes not even in our religions all that much. Various spiritual traditions, there's some amazing things that happen, but, and I think a lot of young people, or even our age people, there's like, where do you turn to have those kinds of conversations and to really learn? So I was kind of lucky in that way. There's all these, because my parents were interested in training, they would have all these, people who invented forms of therapy, like really amazing thinkers, stay at our home and dinner. And so when I was young, I remember, especially on group therapy, like, what is this thing that's the group? And they would be processing it. And I couldn't quite follow all of it, but it was so rich and assuring that the human experience makes sense. Like, we make sense, basically. There is some insight there's a way we can work with ourselves. There's a way we can, heal and connect and grow. So I think that set me up in a slightly unusual path. And I also did get it very much into meditation and mindfulness and spiritual practice during college. So that was over 20 years ago now, and did a lot of real study there, and just meditating hours a day. And that was also a beautiful part of just kind of really learning that the inner world is real, is approachable, is worthy of just being witnessed, and will reveal itself if you slow down to witness it.
I knew this was going to happen. I already have the chills. So real, approachable, worthy of being witnessed.
Yeah.
Is such a beautiful thing to say.
Yeah, there's a lot, just that piece. And of course, I'm not the only one to say that. I've learned that from so many wonderful people, including actually all the forms of therapy I've learned. But one of the most healing things we can do is deeply witness our own mind. You could say parts of ourself or our story, which there's kind of two things about that. I think there's a way when we witness our pain, either to understand, there's kind of two things we're wanting to understand when we look internally. One, what did we experience? And two, what did we learn from that experience? And both of those things are worth like bringing our full adult, present, like resourced intelligence, and capacity toward that. Because in the moment, when we're just like a kid or we're experiencing things, we don't have space to process it and grieve and be curious about what it means. Like, does this mean I'm bad?
Right.
Or let's say if dad left when we were 8, it's like, first of all, the pain needs to be seen of that.
Yep. Right.
Because otherwise we feel sort of lost and alone in the world. And that's a deep knowing. I'm basically alone if no one's witnessing my pain. And two, to really slow down and say, oh, and I also took on that it was my fault that he left, maybe. And that needs to be revisited. Like, oh, what meanings did you take on? How can we reassess that. I know I just jumped off the cliff and went.
No, stop. Please do not apologize. This is fantastic. This is incredible. This is because I want to get into a conversation on parts and the development of schema and things like that. I think we're on the exact right track.
Okay,
so
good.
Thank you. And I think, this idea of witnessing is so important. I think, at least in my experience, I think people sometimes undervalue the act of just developing awareness and looking and acknowledging, seeing clearly, and how powerful that can be. At least in my branch of this work, I think people are so one foot in front of the other. Let's do the next thing. Let's go. And actually, I don't know if you see, I make art. This is
wonderful.
An unfinished piece, so please don't judge me. But I know part of me was really into layers and making, and it was actually only once I started coaching, and I mentioned taking sort of a therapy forward approach to coaching and really digging into this world and doing some of my own work, that I bought a sander, Tori, and started sanding down old paintings and digging into them and trying to it's been a really cool thing. But this act of going back, if only to observe and not feeling like you have to, for me at least, do something.
I just want to highlight 2 points around that in terms of why it can be difficult to observe ourselves. And there's kind of some understanding in psychology that we've had for a long time, and then some slightly new perspective on that.
Sure.
But so the first one that we've known for a while is that while we all say, oh, mindfulness is so important and self-awareness is so important and all these things, I think we don't fully appreciate that most of us have literally been trained that it's dangerous to be aware of yourself.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So an example would be if we were a child and we saw something, we were just generally aware, or maybe we saw something like, hey, it's not really okay what dad's doing, or I'm not getting, but we weren't allowed to see that. Or like just general awareness was not okay to have. Does that make sense, that one?
Yeah.
Or we're
I'm trying to think back to moments where I had to sort of override my desire to note something that felt off.
Right. And if you can't note it, if there's no space for talking about what's really going on, it actually doesn't feel good to hold that awareness. It's like a little bit punishing of just awareness itself. Then second, let's say we feel something, we're sad and we see that destabilize mom, and then she gets depressed for 3 days and we lose, people don't have capacity for it, or they shame us, or they tell us, you're being a sissy, or, what I mean? Or we're angry and we're being too much, and that's not okay. How dare you be angry at me? These are healthy parts of ourselves, like what we feel, that we want to be aware of. It's so important to our actual health to be aware of what we know, what we feel, what we need, and to have like a full repertoire of like behaviors. Like, I know I want to set a boundary. That doesn't feel good, but nope, I can't, because then I lose connection. Or there's all these things that at some point we have some experience that says, do not be aware of that part of yourself or your mind, or that kind of information, you could say, that could come from your mind, like that information of what you feel, what you need, what you know, who you are, even like if we're gay and if that's not okay, whatever. It's like there's something internally that could come into our consciousness, our awareness.
Yeah.
That's not, if that doesn't go somewhere good, but rather it's us be rejected or seems to harm somebody because they can't handle it, or, then it makes sense that we have a deep imprint that says, basically, don't be mindful. Don't be self-aware. There's no point. You'll be rejected.
Right.
So I just let me see how that's landing for you, because I haven't heard it exactly said the way I'm saying it. But no,
it's new, and neither have I. I like this though. Yeah. I think it's really interesting to think through. It's really interesting to think through, because it makes complete sense, and especially it aligns with this idea that setting boundaries is a potential risk for loss of connection. So the act of having to see and note the thing that you don't like, and then say, I don't want more of this, feels like treacherous territory, probably, as a young person. But I would even extend that probably pops up periodically through a life. That's probably that the version of the young person is also maybe an early career professional who is, in a state of sort of constant override. I don't know, but I was talking to this person, also in the field, in your field. And we were discussing this idea of selective override and how that is, and I wonder what you think about that, how an override has become a big theme in my life, because I think one of my skills as an athlete, I played sports for a long time. I played 16 seasons of football. I had an absolutely wonderful time, changed my life, friends forever, et cetera, et cetera. I was one of the lucky folks who had a good story. But it included a lot of what you could put into the category of override, endurance, so like I wonder if like to the ability to say also that like I see that I don't like it, but I'm willing to endure this to get to the other side of it or whatever, or it's not quite as bad. Like that becomes sort of a tricky process for people too. So to acknowledge that one needs to set up a boundary, and then to the second level of acknowledgement that like this is a boundary that I, at least in this moment, for that purpose, am willing to override. And this is not an unaware state of overriding, which is, I think, unhealthy from what I've come to understand. But selectively overriding.
So let me see if this might help. Like there's an IFS language, which is internal family systems, and they do a lot of work with parts, the parts of us that learn, for instance, I can't be self-aware. Yeah. They make a distinction between a part and its burden. So,
part and its burden, right?
Yeah. So the part might be, I am strong. I have a part of me that knows how to endure and press forward when things are difficult.
Right.
Now that's not good or bad. It's just a capacity. Like the part is sort of just that capacity. It's our capacity for humor, our humorous part, our, intelligence, our curiosity. There's just capacities, and that's good. We want that capacity. We want to have in our repertoire, like a moment where we can, if we want to, really have resilience and push through and have grit, let's say. Right. Now, burden would be if that part learned, you have to always and only lean on that part.
Right. Right.
Anytime you choose to do something else, that means you're being weak.
Right.
So that is an important distinction to make, but it's not mean that we have to let go of our grit, even if we're doing healing around like, why am I always pushing myself so far? It's like, okay, you can keep the pusher or the fixer, but let's have a one that feels that part feel freed up to actually like do its job without being burdened. Like I always have to take over. It's only up to me to take care of, Tori or whatever. Like it's only up to me. There's no other strength in the system, Then if we can kind of like be aware of it, but it doesn't feel fear-based basically, or conditioned like that has to be, then our bigger self, our huge, whole, intelligent adult self, what we call our self, our true self, can then determine. It's kind of like a coach calling in different players. It's like, right now we need the grit. Right. This is actually a moment where grit is needed. And then that player can pop in and do the thing. But if it's not a moment for that, if it's a moment where actually really collapsing and resting and getting support is needed, the grit person isn't going to come in, because it is learned. If you don't always do that, you're in trouble, or you're weak.
I love that metaphor. And it's one that I think it'll resonate. It resonates, to different degrees in different circles, but especially in anyone who's at least seen a sport played on TV, this idea that let's call the quarterback, I don't know, the problem solving part. Right. Like, fair enough. Now, you want him on the bench. You want him there to be able to tag in. You don't want to throw him out of the stadium. You just don't want him calling his own number and continuing to come in. Same with let's just characterize grit as the linebacker. I don't know. Yeah. You want him. He's part of the squad, right? Yeah. He's part of he's part of the team of one part of this team of parts. He just doesn't get to tag himself in and go in whenever he wants.
He's not the coach. He can't.
He's not the coach. There you go.
Yeah, we have to. I think it's such a great metaphor. I've never thought, maybe until talking with you, to use that metaphor, but it is a great metaphor of that we really do have a team of players inside. Yeah. That is just known by psychology now, and we even know the science of it. The computer metaphor I use for this is that our brain's a parallel processor. Like we just have different learnings and different capacities held through different neural networks in our brain. We have multiplicity. We are not one identity in a way, or one way of being. We have different ways of being, right? Sometimes we can be really soft. Sometimes we can be really,
Yeah.
All of that is true to us, these capacities, but we do ultimately need a coach that is just our basic centered, aware self.
So maybe this is a good point or a good moment to identify, at least loosely, for someone who's maybe not familiar, parts work and what we mean by self. Because I know before I entered this this range of understanding, I thought I knew what I meant by myself.
Yeah, and it was probably a part. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So through the lens of IFS work, can you give us a little more background on that?
Okay, so maybe actually through a story is the easiest way to do this. So IFS was invented by Dick Schwartz, and he actually first worked with families doing what's called family systems work. That's why it ended up being internal family systems work. So he was looking at dynamics, group dynamics, like between family members. But he suddenly had the insight, we have an inner team, an inner family of parts, and they have dynamics. We might have one part of us that bullies another part or dominates it, or one part that's scared of another part of us, like we're scared of the critic, and then the part that feels small and criticized. And so he began with his clients to really map out this inner territory.
Right.
These are really interesting dynamics. Like we can get polarized where one part really wants to be perfect and is like, no, we have to be perfect. And the other one's like, F it. Like, I'm so freaking tired of being perfect. I'm going to go out and like party and go crazy and do some drugs. And like, and we it's like, there's a way we can get really polarized, and we have different impulses. We have different parts of us, really. And what he discovered was the first, this isn't quite getting to your question yet, but I will get there. Okay. The first thing he discovered was that none of these parts are bad.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So we'll get to this.
No bad parts. This is beautiful. Yeah.
So how he discovered that is he first thought that these parts were not bad, but like dysfunctional, right? Like he was working with like someone who was cutting themselves, for instance, and he was just trying to, or like a lot of people who are struggling with anorexia. So he was like the anorexic part, the cutting part, the drinking part,
the self-harming.
Right. These are problem parts. And we want to kind of like stand up with authority to them and tell them to stop it, or like convince them that that's not the best thing to do and blah, blah, blah. And that hugely backfired.
Right.
Yeah. And so what he realized was, as he began to actually just have a respectful dialogue with these parts, he realized that for each of these parts, they were not a bad part. They had just taken on a burden like, well, if I don't cut myself right now, I'm going to be so flooded with emotions that I'll kill myself. Right? Something bad, worse. I'm here to protect. I'll use myself, continuing to use myself.
Right.
I'm here to protect Tori. Like I believe Tori needs me.
Right.
Or if I don't drink, I'll fall into this pit of this lonely feeling, and I can't, and then my wife will be, blah, blah. It's like, there's always a reason underneath that part, what that part is doing.
Right.
So that was the first thing he realized, was understanding the good intention under the quote unquote bad behavior.
That's so important. And I don't want to derail this at all.
There's a couple things.
But there's so many, I get hung up on that in a positive way. I sit there because the stories that come out of that recognition are so powerful. So there are people, of course, I think probably who would hear this idea and I don't think, I know, because I've had these conversations, who are self-disciplinary, who are pure behaviorists. This cannot happen any longer. Fair enough. But it's one thing to say that, like, okay, we recognize that we don't want this behavior, we don't want this demonstration anymore. To recognize that is fair, but to just discipline, to just scold this thing is, the stories he tells, and I don't want this to be triggering or overly graphic, but I think one of the ones that you explained, this person who was self-harming, he talks about how they get into this deep discussion and they wrestle with this self-harming part, and he's like, get out of here, and like and he thinks, he like pats himself on the back, they think they've done something so meaningful, and then a week or two down the line the person returns and now they've actually cut their face or something, they've done something even more dramatic, because instead of healing the burdened part of themselves who was there for relief or control or whatever it might have been to protect the person, was actually aggravated instead of
that's right,
healed. it's crazy
That,
powerful. Anyway, I'm sorry but
oh,
yeah,
you're right on. Well, that was a huge shift for our field.
huge.
And it wasn't only him that had that insight, but he's done a really great job, Dick Schwartz, of communicating this piece.
Right.
Another one of my mentors, Bruce Ecker, developed something called coherence therapy. And the whole reason it's called coherence therapy is that everything has a coherent purpose underneath. Like,
Oh gosh, that's so good. Yeah.
So this is a really, really, the idea of coherence is my favorite one in all psychology.
Me too. Can we come back to it after you tell this story?
Yeah, this is it. This is what we are saying right now is there's always a positive intention. There's always a learning that necessitates what we're doing based on something we learned. And we can talk about why it's unconscious in a moment, but based on something we learned, we may not be aware of what that learning is, but it is there. Tori will be worse off. Jim will be worse off if I don't do this thing.
Yeah.
And even though if our rational mind says that's not good, why would I want to cut? Why would I want to drink? Why would I want to not feed myself food? Like that's so rational, but there is a knowing underneath. So that's kind of the piece of coherence. So I know this is a long way of getting to your actual original question.
No, because I just have to hold this up real quick. This is one of our, we are all, does your behavior match your goal? That's one of our core mantras. We call it the mantra of practical mindfulness. And it's all about coherence and integrity. It's yeah. Anyway, we'll continue later, but yes.
So, so what he began doing once he had a respectful relationship to these parts, then he actually could ask them to what's called soften back. I mean, that's just a language, like, can you step aside, but not because we're pushing you or like you're bad, you need to leave, but we understand what your fear is. We're going to try it this way, to explain what we're doing so you feel safe. Can you soften back so that we can maybe attend to another part and he kept finding these parts come up that want attention. But then finally, as he got them all to soften back and kind of like, okay, now that he would say, okay, what part is there? And people would say, well, it doesn't feel like a part. It's just myself. Now, self is what we find when we're not taken over by a part.
Yeah.
In other words, while our humor, let's say, is a part of us, it's not like our true, like only like all of ourself, but it's a part of us. It's part of our landscape. If the humor part learned, let me give a better example, like the fixer part, because that might resonate.
Sure.
Like some fixer manager, like I've got to be perfect. I've got to like strive. I've got to, like, if that is taking over because it feels like if it ever softens at all, that person's going to be criticized or judged or fail or collapse, or if it's on all the time and that one, like we're leading with that one capacity and that one imperative to do it this way all the time, we can identify with that part. But while it's a part, it's not our full self. It's not like our pure self. And so when that can kind of soften back, what we find is we're not just a collection of parts. We also have just our mind working. Like, I think it was like unconditioned, like all these other things are conditioned. Like I have to do it in this way because I learned. I have to do this because I learned.
Right.
It's my thing. And when we kind of like let all that step back, then we just have our mind flowing in this kind of fresh, open, non-agenda, like I have to do it this way, just kind of freed up to use its intelligence, like to be, just to perceive things as they actually are and like have an intuitive sense for what we need and what feels right, and to problem solve really rationally. And, it's just like, we enter a brain state that's like incredibly wise and intelligent, and not to mention calm. They have the 8 C's, calm, compassionate, clear. We have those like qualities inside us just naturally. The only reason we sometimes think we don't is because a part has stepped in, and none of our parts hold those qualities. They hold some capacity, some more specific capacity, like striving or perfectionism or whatever. But when we let all that kind of step aside, we all innately have in us like almost like a little Buddha self. I mean, like this really enlightened self. Like it's amazing. You don't actually have to learn those qualities. You just have to unlearn not giving access to those qualities.
Isn't that exceptional? That's it's amazing, Tori, how many people I've before I even was as familiar as I think I might be or am becoming with the term burdening, I used to think of it as being unblocked. And I refer to my own stuff. And I think for anyone listening who is maybe in the professional realm, I know people have struggled with the idea, like, self-harming behavior in any of its manifestations, okay, people, it's clear why that's not ideal. But some of these other parts, like the fixer or the person who's trying to achieve, or the person who is like, and this is true, I think everyone, I would guess that everyone who's at the absolute top of their field has some burdened parts that are pushing them.
Yeah,
so,
sure,
you know,
sure.
And that's not necessarily wrong either.
Yeah.
You know, my hope, and maybe yours too, I don't want to put words in your mouth, it's just that they're aware of the things that are going on. Maybe because hypothetically, you talk to someone who's mid-career, done something well. Maybe it was a burdened part that helped them, or it was a burdening that helped them develop a part that has allowed them to accomplish something at a really high level. Okay, fair enough. But how does it feel around that? How do you make people feel around you? And again, like, if you can, I think if you can tag in and be thoughtful about it, and then say, okay, I know that this high achievement piece, this perfectionist tendency, whatever it might be, I know that it came, you know, the full backstory. And I want to heal these other parts around it so that I can still accomplish at a high level. And it'll just feel wildly better, that I won't feel so compelled I might be talking a little bit about, from personal experience, on a Sunday to go to write for hours on end and try to be published and these things. So I won't feel so compelled to do that. I know I've got the skill set if I need to call upon it, but it's not this like tangled, tight behind the eyes, pushing forward absently. Anyway, I hope that makes sense, because I did tag in my own experience there a little bit.
You know, it was funny. I was in a training recently where a student asked, like, so what is the point of doing all this? It was like an IFS training. It's like, what's the point of doing all this mapping our parts? And
yeah,
I love the person's, response. She said, just to give us options.
Great.
It's like,
yeah, that's great.
It's great. If you want to have the option to go work on a Sunday and that's actually what's good for you, it should be on the table. If it's not what's good for you, you shouldn't have to feel compelled to do it anyway.
Totally. That's it. And this layers in with coherence. Like, that the truth is, there are some Sundays where my ideal Sunday might be get up, go for a walk, grab a cup of coffee, sit down, start reading, move to writing. And then maybe, and that's a well-spent day.
Yeah. It's wonderful.
But to opt into that is so different than getting out of bed on a Sunday morning and feeling like I have to get to something.
That's right.
Yeah.
Let's just sit with that for a moment, because that feels really important. Yeah. And that is leaning into, I think that's might be fresh for some people, or like, oh, wow. Like, because it's not how our culture, we generally all move from, and to think how that would feel to just have your mind in the moment, sort of in a sort of balanced way, in an easy, intelligent, sort of in the moment, like really looking around for this moment based on all I know, which is a lot. Like, what am I feeling is right for next, and what aligns with my values and and my goals, and that is a much more freed up space. It doesn't mean we are going to be any less capable. That will be
right. Yeah. Right. And I love that. And for the feeling cannot be, I know that there are times in my life where I would have had to almost be convinced that the pursuit of that feeling was worthwhile, because I was more interested in the outcome. And I would even suggest, just for the potentially tentative listening to this, that the outcome also improves in that state.
Yes, because
not that that's the point necessarily. But.
Yeah, you were highlighting that this is a good feeling, and yes, it is a good feeling to be in self.
Yeah.
But it also is a state with more capacity, ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
And wisdom and courage actually is one of the C's. It's like that part, it's not less able. And in fact, now it has sort of it's the coach. It like now has at its sort of like fingertips, like all these parts it can call on, like you do your thing now.
That's right. Right. Yeah. The self is the coach in this metaphor, isn't it? Yeah. That's the thing tagging in.
Yeah.
Okay. I love all of this. And I have a lot of questions about your work, just because I want to learn from you. But I think in the spirit of the podcast, I really want to know, here's my question. How does this, I have two big ones. One of them is, how does this work impact you? How do you keep yourself separate from this work? Because I imagine you dig in deep with a lot of folks and have probably had some really challenging and trying conversations and meaningful relationships that are not always easy. How do you differentiate yourself from this deep work going into the selves of others?
Actually, this is one of my favorite part of IFS training is that it is the training to do the therapy from yourself, not from.
Oh, I love that.
Not from a therapist part.
Wow.
I mean, if in a moment a therapist part needs to come in or an intellectualizing part comes in, thank you for your help. Thank you for telling me that intellectual thing. I can use that. You're probably right. But most therapists are also leading with what we would call a manager. Most of the parts we've been talking about are managers. Like, I'm going to fix it. I'm going to do this. And I can tell you, when you're sitting across from another human being who's wanting healing and wanting to be witnessed, if you step into managing them, it doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
It will probably just bring up more resistance, right? Or compliance.
Compliance. That's a big word. Yeah, that's right.
It'll either be like, screw you. You don't know what, you think it's so easy just to stop being hard on my, or it'll bring up, you're right. I'm so silly for doing that. Let's convince me to do something different. Wise therapist that's above me. So either way, that's not a healing space of exploration.
No. Right. Compliance is such an interesting word.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about that so much recently, especially in the development of people, young people, professionals, etc. If you're trying to develop future leaders or healthy, healed, productive, creative folks, pure compliance, a little bit of compliance is probably necessary to operate within a society, but you don't want to be coaching for compliance. At least I don't think so. Right. Okay, that makes complete sense, by the way. So you going to yourself, when do you find that difficult ever? Do you find it like?
It can be. Yes, I do. Yeah. I think the fact I had all these years of mindfulness practice probably helped. And I'd done a lot of my own healing work. Like you really can't just have the intention, I'm going to come from self. You have to do any therapist has to be in there and, go to those wounded places, unburden them, which is a slightly different kind of unburdening, really heal the wounds underneath these managing parts. So that they actually are safe to soften back.
Yeah.
And that you've done the work to really establish a way for them to soften back that isn't just because I told them to.
That's right. Okay. So what parts of you do you feel like have been born out of burden more than others, if you're willing to share?
Well, I was just doing a session with someone on the IFS faculty who's kind of teaching me, but a lot of that's through my own work. So I literally had an IFS session on myself yesterday.
Love it. Perfect.
And, and it was around a certain perfectionism in the teaching and kind of differentiating my passion for learning and getting all the details and mapping the mind. Because I do a lot more than most therapists do around time learning and diagramming and thinking about it. And so there's a burden part of that as we were tracking it yesterday, kind of came from this feeling of even though I had all these lovely elders and mentors, sometimes they were full of crap,
Sure.
And they would say things overconfidently. Sometimes, and there was just some wounding I had around hey, these are wonderful people, but they're really dropping others and me in this moment by being too simplistic in their reality. So, that's kind of broad brush strokes idea, but it gave me this feeling of I have to never be too, I always am going for more complexity. I can't just sit on my laurels and be this is how it is. There's so many people that are I know reality and they just have some simple frame and they think everyone else is nuts. And I just never want to be that person. I imprinted that very early. Now, on the other hand, I also genuinely love to learn. So it's separating the burden, which is you have to do this and suffer over it, and from the part of me that's just genuinely interested and curious and can do it in a relaxed way but passionate, active, still do as much learning, but without that kind of edge of because if you don't, you're being one of those people that are arrogant. You should never be like them, or and so I mean, there's always more to find, I have to say. It's not like we're ever finished. So, I mean, I've been doing this kind of work forever, and I wasn't aware of that,
Yeah.
So, but that's an example. It's like, it's nice to be able to slow down when we feel it, feel a sense of burden. Like, why am I angsty? Like, why is there anxiety with this, or pressure, or why am I being this perfectionistic? And then just kind of like listening, underneath for like, well, why is that making sense? Like, what did I learn? What am I afraid would happen? That's always I ask this question. What are you afraid would happen if you weren't doing that?
Right.
To, what the learning was.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And I can't tell you how much that resonated with me. I think I have the same exact issue where I usually use language that's not quite as kind, because maybe I didn't have the field of mentors, and I'm not critiquing the folks that I was around, but I use a term that sounds like full of stuff about certain, yeah. And so I have something very similar, and I don't know, I suppose it would fall into the category of like an investigator part or something like that, but similarly combined with genuine curiosity. And like, at which point, like, who's being tagged in when the last thing I want to do is be that person, kind of similar to the one that you described.
Isn't that interesting? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. There's a synchrony there. Like, so it's like the pain of seeing someone be overconfident or misguided, and directing others, whatever, and feel like, oh, I don't want to be them, be that person.
Tori, I have a number of memories of like, why do you think that's right? I don't, and this is even young, like that's clearly not right. Where is your proof of concept?
Evidence?
Yeah. Well, and then like you say, sort of like the overconfidence and the overly simplistic approach to it. I said for a long time, without even really knowing what I was talking about, was like, I think the surest way to be wrong is to assume that you're absolutely right about anything. And and that was probably me in college, and then it's evolved since then, but it definitely comes from a similar place.
I really like that. And so it's like, we can honor that we both probably, one, naturally have curious minds and perceptive, some like sensitivity or something, or perceptiveness. Because of that, we've really picked up on and noticed this is feeling too concrete or simplistic or arrogant or judgmental or whatever the thing is we picked up on. While that part of us is still the one doing all the research and everything, it just has this burden on top of it that says, yeah, because if you don't, you'll be an arrogant asshole like those people. And it just has this extra belief that creates this urgency. And we can soften that, and we can soften that and say, you know what? I actually know that's not who I am.
Yeah, right. Part
of me actually knows I'm no longer in danger of becoming that.
Right. And it's so interesting that you whispered, because it feels just kind of like a whisper back there. It's not like loud, fearful, booming voice, but it's in there.
In fact, sometimes it's so quiet in a sense, or it's so from some deep part of our brain that we don't even hear it. We just hear the "you better do this," but we don't always hear why. And that actually kind of brings us back to the earlier point around like, why are we not aware of ourselves? And the first one was because we learned to not be, to like consciously suppress it or repress it or whatever. But there's another thing at play here, which is a lot of these kinds of learnings, we just evolved to have our implicit memory systems handle.
Yeah.
And those are not by nature conscious unless we ask them to become conscious. The whole point is to automate things and keep them in the background so we don't have to think about it.
Right.
That's why we can drive to work without thinking about it. It's implicit. It's an implicit memory. We can ride a bike without being like, I have to do the right foot and then the left foot. And then it's muscle memory. It's how we play sports. Like, there's a lot of sophisticated mental processes underneath, like being able to guess that ball is going to go there. Like, you could not rationally know that. You could not rationally like put out a pen and paper and be like, well, the vortex and the thing and the with this speed, it's traveling and at velocity. Right. You're not actually cognitively smart enough to do that, but the implicit system is actually really sophisticated. It can do all these calculations. It just does not do them consciously.
Right.
We need it not to be conscious, or else you'd be frozen on the football field. You just have to go. You have to go to the ball. Like, we can't think about it. And so the weird thing is that's also true of our psychology. So most of our psychology is like learning to run around that football field. We don't know why. We just go. Like, our body knows. Similarly, I know when I'm having a feeling, shut it down. if someone asks something for me, have this response,
Right.
and we're wired, even though we can make it conscious, it's not wired to be speaking to us all the time, the why.
Right. Absolutely. It makes sense. And I think it's interesting to use the word wired, because as you're saying that, it reminds me of a metaphor that I will sometimes use. And that's this process of unbraiding. You think of even like a string of Christmas lights, like, eventually these, behaviors, sorry, advertising, we don't, but like, does your behavior match your goal? Will you behave in a certain way, hopefully in accordance with the goal? As a child, that might just be not to get yelled at, but then all of a sudden the behaviors habituate and they become subconscious. So you just do them absently. And then this process of unbraiding, as far as it sounds like what you're talking about is like unbraiding it, looking at each piece individually, and then either reassembling, or sometimes just the act of unbraiding is enough, and now the lights can be displayed in this elegant way, and hopefully good, healthy patterns begin to come habituated, and then the whole thing becomes more fluid. And
well, it's funny you say that, because I've been writing just this morning before we met. I was writing and describing like, why is it we get stuck? And I've been using the word tangled a lot recently. It's like, there's a tangle in our unconscious mind that tangles up feeling with danger and with this. It's like something got hooked up that actually tangles you up from just moving forward. Yeah. It's like, you can't move forward there. You have to go this other thing. And now you're rerouted over here, and it's very hard to get free from. So I think I love that, the braided, or it's like we get tangled somewhere.
Yep.
And so the work then is to go inside and say, okay, so why are you going that way? Why are you getting tangled right there? You're the why, right, that I'm going to be conscious. Well, because if I don't, dad will do this, or if I don't, mom can't handle it, or if I don't, the kids at school, whatever, or it means this, or I'll be like a jerk. Like if I let myself feel angry, I'll be a rageaholic like my dad. And I can't let myself be like those people. Right. Like, so whatever the unconscious thing that tangles you up there is just tracking that. Oh, that is associated with that in your unconscious mind. If you can actually make that conscious, I know this is squishing a lot into one conversation, but I'm just going to do a quick plug for memory consolidation. If you can the second you make that conscious, and that's actually a neural network, by the way, that's not just a metaphor. It's like literally things have gotten together, wired together. So the second you can make that conscious, it sends electricity down that neural network, right? And when electricity is running through that neural network, and at the same time it's activated like that, it witnesses something that proves that the reality underneath that tangle, like it is bad to ever do, and so I must do this, that disproves that reality in some way. It unlocks the proteins that hold that tangle together, so the whole tangle can be dissolved.
What is that? Is that in the realm of cognitive dissonance?
Nope, it's called memory reconsolidation.
What is it? Memory what?
Memory reconsolidation.
Memory reconsolidation.
Yep.
Yeah, totally. That's
which is a new word. Even most therapists have not heard of it yet. I'm trying to get the word out about it.
Yeah. Can I tell you that a part of me just showed up that was that I was embarrassed that I didn't have the word.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I'm over it. I'm over it now. But like, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So memory reconsolidation. That's but having that okay, well, let's get to like, say you want to help someone through that. How do you get someone to that place? Do you create hypothetical situations? Do you try to put them in positions? Yeah, you can.
Actually, that's pretty intuitive on your part, because one of the things you actually can do, it's called, I won't get into why it's called symptom deprivation, but anyway, it's a fantasy, imaginal thing used in coherence therapy, is imagining doing the thing that you supposedly want to do, like give yourself a break and stop being so perfectionistic, or that you supposedly want to do, like stop procrastinating and go ahead and do the thing, whatever that thing is, that your goal, right? Like imagine just doing the behaviors that go to that. Like imagine it. And what you'll find is that brings up anxiety.
Interesting.
Or it'll ping the part that's like, no. Great. Consciously, you want to go there. We don't want to have anything to do with that. We know that's dangerous. And again, and you want to bring that into awareness, So, sometimes just picturing like, okay, I say I don't want to procrastinate, but when I picture sitting down at my computer, okay, I'm going to sit down at my computer. And then immediately the part that comes up that says, if you sit down and start writing this, you'll bump into what an idiot you are, or something. You do what I mean?
Oh,
It's
wow.
like something
Yeah. You'll have to confront. Yeah, totally.
come up to stop you, and then it's there. And then you can start becoming curious and saying, not fighting it, not telling it it's wrong. Like, you better go away. You're blocking my career, blah, blah, blah. Nope, none of that. Just with curiosity, say, so tell me, you could say, what are you afraid would happen if I can feel you there now. You're my chest. There's a tightness in my chest. Like, what are you afraid would happen? And it begins saying, yeah, because you bump into your worthlessness, or you won't be able to do it. And it'll feel blah, blah, blah. You can even do, sometimes I'll do like sentence completions where I'll say, like, feel that, get in touch with that impulse, and just 10 times finish the sentence. I better not sit down to write this, because if I do, I better not sit, and with the repetitions, it's like the unconscious mind can't help but fill in the gaps. Well, because blah, blah, blah. And it like begins to
eventually it'll just erupt like that. Sure.
Yeah, it begins to show up. And then you just stay curious and see if you got it. And usually the nice thing about these places, if you make a statement of it, it was done in coherence therapy, but you'll write out a statement. I better not blah, 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 because if I do, so it's like, or I better do this, because if I don't, and you get the language of it. If you repeat that to them, or they say it out loud, it's like your body recognizes it as truth. It's like, yeah, that's true. I mean, I rationally know that's not true.
Right.
But my heart and my body are like, yeah, that feels true. There's a recognition process. Even if it wasn't conscious before, as you begin to hear it and listen to the language and map it out, it's almost like your mind believes this. That's the tangle. Your mind, like, it is, I better never let myself be angry, because if I do, I'll be a rageaholic. Or it's like, wow, like, okay. As we bring it into awareness, our system is able to guide us and say, you're on it. Or no, that's not quite it. It's more like this. And our unconscious mind will actually work with us to get the clarity, which is really cool.
That's fantastic. That's really digging down to what some might call bedrock concepts, foundational. What if someone gets to the place where they're like, ultimately confront their own sense of worth, say, they're trying to do work, or they're disgruntled with a boss, and so-and-so didn't do this, and you keep working back and back, you soften back or dig down, or probably dig in this case, and you get to a place where you find that, I'll have to confront my own sense of worth. Yeah. How do you coach them through that? Or coach is the wrong word.
I could give sort of description of what the technique, or I could do that through an example I just had this week. Which would you prefer?
A story. Yeah. If you did it with someone, that'd be great.
Yeah. I did a very sweet, I don't see a lot of clients right now, but I do actually, sometimes I even call it coaching, so I can do across the country.
Sure. I totally.
So this was a man, who grew up in India and poor, actually. And he came in with just like, look, I have depression and anxiety, and I'm worried it's messing with my life.
Sure.
First piece of it, there's a lot that's going to be in this example from what we've talked about beyond the self-worth part. But so the first thing was just noticing that he'd done all this stuff to try to manage his depression and anxiety, like get his sleep better, learn some mindfulness, good things like mindfulness, and
these are all important things.
Great things, But as we slow down, the first thing, we've only met 3 times, but and the first time I was like, really? Okay, so those are the first thing we did was just honor that part that was trying so hard. We call it his fixer. Wow, thank you. It also could express to us how exhausted it was. It's also a really important part of relationship building with it, and hearing it's exhausted, but at the same time feels like there's nobody else but it to help this person heal, so it has to do it. So first we just did relationship building with that part. It's we see you, we honor your service. Wow, you've done so much. You have helped in all of these, and it wanted to be witnessed in all the ways it helped. But then I think in the first or second session, I was able to talk to that part and say, there is another part that is the depressed part, the anxious part, that needs something, but fixing energy is probably not going to heal this part.
Right.
We're going to need a more healing energy. And you are great at fixing, but you're not a healer. That part was able to it was like hope building and trust in me. And would you mind me guiding through myself and your adults, other parts of you, if you can step back and let us go more toward the wound directly.
Yeah.
Did that. And that part was willing. Okay. So then the next piece was really feeling, okay, where does this actual depression coming from? And what we could feel was that he'd been very bullied, felt very criticized by his mom, and not at all loved by his dad. So there's a lot of bullying, especially, this. So we went back in time. We just floated back in time. I said, let your mind show us, where does this go?
Right.
And he could see the young him that felt worthless and why. And it began telling us what's called the secret history. It's secret history. So what no one else has witnessed, remember, this kind of coming back to the witnessing, no one else had witnessed that. He was totally alone. Mom wasn't supporting him with the bullying, or, the bullies were off, dad didn't feel, wasn't getting a sense of worth from dad. So, however, his adult self is a pretty lovely guy, and as he went back and, saw his young child self, he really could genuinely see that he had value.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Which is the disconfirmation. That pretty reliably happens. It's hard to fully see someone's pain, especially an innocent child, and not have a part of us say, there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah, right. Interesting.
It's a clarifying moment. It's really hard not to go there. I mean, luckily,
Right.
And so, and sometimes shaming parts will come in, but then again, we just ask them to soften back. What do you need? What are you scared of? How can we help you soften back so that his full self, his adult self now could come to this child? And then, it was really sweet because at first he was saying, like, you ended up like coming to America, like you work at this high job now, like telling him all the things he's done that is great. Like, you're going to be amazing. And then that felt okay. And then at some point I just switched it to I was like, but is with separate from that stuff, is he valuable because he's human?
Yeah.
And just this precious, innocent child, and then that really helped. Like, I do see that, like, he could see it unequivocally. It had nothing to do with his accomplishments.
Yeah.
I say there's a lot of tears throughout all of this work.
Sure.
But, yeah, and then he could like really begin to set up a new relationship with him and this part of him, which is just kind of like a young part that took on is this perfectly beautiful and innocent and healthy,
Right.
just took on this burden. This is a different kind of burden, this burden of I'm worthless. But that's just a belief. That's one of those tangles. His selfhood got tangled up with worthlessness, right? So as we track that, we can go in and say, we're activating it by the image of the child being there present. And then we're having the disconfirmation because he's able to see fully, not intellectually, like, I know I should be good. Like, he really witnessed his own value, like, very clearly. And when those two things happen at the same time in the brain, it unlocks this incredible form of neuroplasticity so that the wound itself can actually dissolve.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm hearing you say is that you have to, I wonder if there's no way that you could accomplish that without going back there, and because the logic is sort of up for debate. And I wonder if people who are already entrenched in certain ways of thinking could ever get to that place. I know I was working with someone fairly recently who I showed this diagram, this framework that I've put together that touches on a lot of this. And it goes from self to mindset to skill development to behavior, the ultimate demonstration of things. And I'd actually love to show it to you at some point, but that's maybe not for the moment. But this person could not untangle, to use your word now, unbraid the difference between the behavior and self. They were so resistant to it. They were like, no, I don't think I'm on board with the idea that every human is inherently valuable, or most importantly, what this person was saying was, or that I am inherently valuable. But what a powerful thing to actually go through the process of witnessing your child self. How could you judge that person? Am I hearing that correctly? There's really no way to do it but to feel it.
Yeah, to fully witness again, to go back to the moment where you took on some view of reality and just try again, witness it again. Like, what is your current self? Yeah. Actually, with fresh eyes, what do you see? Now, there are less, like, I don't want to scare anybody because, like, it doesn't always have to be that
intense,
intense and like, you know what I mean? There are like, for instance, in this coherence therapy I keep mentioning, sometimes it goes to inner child work, but it doesn't necessarily. It's like, it's just really tracking, like, okay, what did you believe? there's a softer way to disconfirm that in terms of like, well, has it ever not worked that way? There is a more like, there's not like the only way to like ever have a powerful disconfirmation and unlock memory.
Totally.
Definitely like inner child work, but it is,
or the opposite, like to keep, that's a great point that you bring up, because it's like, you don't want this, you also don't want this to feel too intimidating, like too big of an idea or too soft an idea for certain dispositions to engage with that. But the confrontation, confronting the gap, I'm pretty convinced, and it sounds like maybe this is aligned with your work, is that the gap between intention and reality, or in some version or other, is the cause of the bulk of our frustrations. I wish so and so would have done this. I had this expectation. Here's what happened. That gap is going to be the size of our discomfort in some way. And this is sometimes helpful in healing in perhaps a less deep way. But you mentioned, what was your word? Why do you think it'll? You've investigated a lot of fears, right? And I will sometimes also, in addition to that, investigate sort of proof of concept. Like, why do you believe you have to do this? Has that played out the way you wanted in the past? Why are we so beholden to that behavior if it's not served you in the way that you were hoping?
That actually can work. That can work as a confirmation of does everybody you've said no to punish you for it? Like, is there any time you said no and it didn't work the way you expect? There are ways to do the first thing though, is to really, really fully understand the why, which I think you're largely doing, but to really get the more clear you get on the why, the easier to find the disconfirmation.
Totally. That's right. And then, so this will be where I don't mean to keep you all day, but my last question is this. So you've got this dig back. How do you, what's one strategy to project forward? So the identification of purpose, how do you help people identify what's right for them or what they want or need?
It's funny. I don't know that I do a lot with that, but because I feel like when I can get people freed up in sort of that flow state where they're what they call self-led, that's the coach, the self and the coach, it's literally called self-led. Then in the moment, they will have a really intuitive, clear, wise, grounded, do you know what I mean? Like sense of what they need and want, and will have the energy and passion to get there.
So that'll appear for them. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, you might still ask, but it's like, all going to be hinging on whether self-energy is there. So my work is getting self-energy there.
That's right. I need to take that more into my work, because one of the way I think it's there sort of subliminally. So the identification of purpose is a really important part of my approach to this, but embedded in that though, in this process, is the willingness to reappraise and say, like, this is where I was heading. I've taken these steps, and you sort of learn in the doing, and then you can tinker with, slightly adjust. So you're constantly moving toward. But I think what I'm hearing from you is that if we could identify the purpose, maybe, from a healed place or an unburdened place, it would be far more clear and it would come far more fluidly. You wouldn't have to work as hard for it.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. Okay. Well, where can people find more of your work? I know there's a lot out there. You're so generous with your ideas. Where can people find them?
So on my YouTube channel, so Tori Olds. There's also, if you're a therapist, you could go to toriolds.com, because I do have online CEUs, like online courses that count for most licenses. They're APA approved. And I have a training group, like a 6-month core training group over Zoom, that you could reach out to me about through my website if you wanted to train with me for, weekly 6-month kind of core. But that's all on experiential work. So that'd be if you're a therapist who's wanting to learn experiential approach to therapy. Right. So online trainings, I do some live, Zoom trainings, and then, but for free stuff, which is always great stuff, then there's YouTube. Yeah.
I appreciate that. And I highly recommend anyone listening to this go do that. I'd also suggest that anyone in the leadership development realm, and take that as broadly as you'd like to take it, in a company, as a consultant, one-on-one, as a group, they may not get CEUs for it, but the education is so obviously helpful. And a disclaimer that I always try to add in my personal work and on these podcasts is I hope that anyone looking to do executive coaching, leadership development coaching will keep their finger on the pulse of where therapy is moving. So when you talk about experimental methods and stuff like that, I think that's so important to be aware of, and also have some humility around, meaning coaches out there, when it's time to tag in a licensed professional, do so. I think it's good to be informed by the work, but not assume that you can do it fully yourself. So
although it depends on the training you get, because
unless you are Tori Olds certified. That's right.
That's right. I wasn't thinking that, but yes, agree. But there are coaches out here. There's IFS coaches.
Sure. Yep.
Yes. So you can become an IFS coach. And I do think that one more resource, Unlocking the Emotional Brain, is if you want to learn about memory consolidation, that's a great resource.
Unlocking the Emotional Brain. All right. Well, Tori, you have an unlimited amount of invites back to have a conversation with us and our audience. So thank you very much for all you do.